Right now, millions of parents slip into dark bedrooms, quietly taking real pieces of their children, lost teeth, and leaving money behind. We call it sweet, but this is not just a bedtime story. It is a commercial ritual built on medieval fear, Viking superstitions, and decades of manufactured myth. Why did we normalize buying children's body parts with cash? And what does that teach us about control, trust, and the value of our bodies? The disturbing truth behind the tooth fairy is far stranger than you think, and once you know how deep it goes, you will never see this childhood right the same way again. If you want to go deeper than the fantasy, make sure you subscribe, because what you will discover next will leave you questioning everything. In medieval Europe, a child's lost tooth was never just a keepsake. It was a threat, a piece of the body that could fall into the wrong hands. Folklore manuscripts from the British Library describe how parents burned their children's baby teeth in the dead of night, believing the smoke would carry away any chance of witchcraft. A tooth left unguarded could be used by a witch to curse the child, or even to control their spirit. Some families buried teeth deep in the earth, marking the spot with stones or iron nails, convinced this would block any spirit from retrieving the tooth and gaining power over their child. Archaeologists have uncovered graves from plague-ravaged centuries in Italy, Bulgaria, and Poland, where stones or bricks were jammed into the mouths of the dead. In Venice, a 16th century woman's skeleton was found with a brick forced between her jaws, her teeth cracked and scattered. These were not random acts. According to experts like Matteo Barini, these practices were meant to stop the dead from rising, to keep so-called night feeders or revenants from chewing their way back into the world of the living. In Bulgaria's Plovdiv necropolis, children's graves sometimes held teeth replaced by stones, a final barrier against restless spirits. The fear ran deeper than simple superstition. Medieval parents believed that any piece of the body, once separated, could become a weapon in the hands of evil. Teeth were especially dangerous. They outlasted flesh, survived fire, and carried the essence of the person they once belonged to. Manuscripts from the 15th century detail rituals, teeth tossed into flames with whispered prayers, or buried at crossroads where spirits would lose their way. Folklorists point out that these acts were not just about protecting children from witches, they were about control, about keeping the boundary between the living and the dead intact. Every burned tooth, every stone in a corpse's mouth was a desperate attempt to keep dark forces at bay. These rituals left a mark, shaping how later generations would handle the small, bloody tokens that children lost in the night. The urge to collect, hide, or destroy a child's tooth was never just a quaint tradition, it was a matter of survival. Across the icy coasts of Scandinavia, losing a tooth meant more than just a visit from a fairy. Vikings called it tand fe, the tooth fee. When a child lost their first tooth, elders placed a coin in the child's palm, not as a reward for bravery, but as a way to turn vulnerability into luck. Norse sagas describe warriors stringing children's teeth onto necklaces, each one a small shield against death in battle. Archaeologists have found grave goods in Sweden and Norway, animal and human teeth worked into ornaments, mixed with iron and amber. Neil Price, a leading Viking historian, points to the Eddas, where warriors believed these charms could confuse the spirits of the dead, or even steal a bit of a child's innocence for strength. The tooth became a talisman, a piece of childhood traded for survival. But the Norse were not alone in turning lost teeth into tokens of power. In the winding alleys of Madrid, a different collector crept into children's stories, a mouse. By 1894, Spanish author Luis Coloma had published the tale of Ratoncito Perez, a small, clever mouse who scurried beneath pillows to swap teeth for coins. This was not a solitary tradition. In Russia, children slipped their teeth into mouse holes in the wall, hoping the rodent would carry them away and bring strong, healthy replacements. In France, the tooth mouse took on a magical edge in the 18th century story La Bonne Petite Souris, where a fairy disguised as a mouse knocks out the villain's teeth to save a queen. These mice were more than cute bedtime visitors. Folklorists like Rosemary Wells have tracked versions across Latin America, Asia, and the Mediterranean. Sometimes the mouse was a guardian, sometimes a thief. In some regions, teeth were left for rats, thrown onto roofs, or buried in fields, always with the hope that the animal's sharp, ever-growing teeth would be passed on to the child. The mouse was a shadowy figure, sneaking in at night, skittering between the worlds of the living and the dead. Unlike the glittering fairy, the mouse belonged to the dark corners of the house, a reminder that something small and hungry always waits to collect what we leave behind. The story of the tooth collector stretches far beyond the fairy tale. From Viking battlefields to Spanish city streets, children's teeth have been traded, hidden, or worn as armor. Each tradition reveals a different anxiety, fear of spirits, hope for strength, or the uneasy knowledge that a piece of the body, once lost, never truly disappears. In the United States, the idea of a winged fairy collecting children's teeth is a surprisingly recent invention. The first known mention appears in the Chicago Daily Tribune on September 20th, 1908. Lillian Brown, writing in the newspaper's Household Hints column, suggested that parents could encourage anxious children to let go of loose teeth by promising a visit from the tooth fairy, who would leave a small gift from the 5-cent counter. This was not an ancient tradition, but a piece of practical advice, an American solution to a universal childhood fear. Just 19 years later, the tooth fairy took the stage. In 1927, Esther Watkins Arnold wrote a play for children titled The Tooth Fairy. Arnold's script introduced a dainty, winged fairy who flitted into bedrooms to collect lost teeth, leaving coins in their place. The play was performed in schools and community centres, helping to cement the image of the tooth fairy as gentle, magical, and distinctly American. There was no mention of mice, rats, or witches, just a sparkling visitor who turned a moment of pain into a reason for excitement. Throughout the early 20th century, references to the tooth fairy began to multiply in newspapers and children's magazines. The story was easy to spread and easy to sell. Unlike the dark rituals of burning or burying, the American fairy was a comforting figure designed to soothe nerves and reward bravery. The timing was no accident. As consumer culture blossomed, the tooth fairy became a ready-made product, a character that could be shaped, marketed, and mass-produced for a new generation of parents and children looking for reassurance in the face of change. Dental offices across America began to hand out pamphlets featuring a smiling, sparkly tooth fairy, promising that good brushing and brave tooth losing would be rewarded. By the late 20th century, the American Dental Association was publishing advice columns under the name Ask the Tooth Fairy, inviting children to send in questions about wobbly teeth and hygiene. The character was no longer just a bedtime story. She became a clinical tool, a mascot for compliance. Pediatric dentists started to keep stacks of tooth fairy stickers and tiny envelopes at the ready, using her image to coax nervous children into the chair and make the experience feel magical instead of frightening. The marketing machine took over. Tooth fairy kits appeared in drugstores, complete with glitter, official certificates, and tiny pillows. Children's books and cartoons erased any trace of the old, unsettling folklore, painting the fairy as gentle, pastel, and endlessly patient. The myth was reinforced everywhere, in waiting rooms, on classroom bulletin boards, even in school assemblies where dentists donned wings and crowns to hand out plastic teeth. Pop culture joined in, sometimes with a sinister twist. In 2003, the horror film Darkness Falls reimagined the Tooth Fairy as a vengeful spirit, haunting children who dared to look at her. But for most families, the image stayed sweet and safe. One pediatric dentist told a trade magazine that the Tooth Fairy is the best behavioral tool we have, and that kids will do almost anything for her. The fairy became less a figure of fantasy and more a system, an expectation enforced by adults and institutions, shaping how children experienced fear, trust, and even the value of their own bodies. 5-year-olds sit in a memory lab, asked to recall the night they lost a tooth. Some describe waking to the sound of fluttering wings. Others remember a sprinkle of glitter, a gentle touch, or the faint smell of something sweet in the dark. But these details were never part of the real event. Researchers such as Dr. Gabrielle Principe and Eric Smith have shown that children who believe in the Tooth Fairy are far more likely to create vivid, supernatural memories that feel as real as anything else from their childhood. In controlled interviews, more than half of strong believers insisted they saw or heard the fairy herself, even when parents and researchers confirmed nothing of the sort had happened. When asked to tell the story for fun, the numbers climbed even higher. Children who did not believe or who were told to be strictly truthful recalled only the basics: a tooth under the pillow, a coin in the morning, maybe a note. But for believers, the mind filled in the blanks with magic, sparkles, voices, tiny footprints, a soft breeze across their cheek. This is not just wishful thinking, it is constructive memory, a process where fantasy belief actually rewires how a child remembers their own experiences. The more invested a child is in the myth, the more likely they are to generate details that never happened. In the words of one researcher, the imagined past becomes indistinguishable from the real one. The Tooth Fairy does not just collect teeth, she leaves behind memories that cannot be separated from reality. And long after the coins are spent, those memories shape how children learn to trust what their own minds tell them. At some point, the fantasy breaks. For most children, the truth about the Tooth Fairy lands between ages 6 and 8. Sometimes it is an overheard conversation, a slip from an older sibling, or a question that parents cannot quite answer. The moment can feel small, a laugh, a shrug, a quiet admission, but for others it is a jolt. One mother remembers her daughter's face when she found a stash of baby teeth in a kitchen drawer. The child's voice was flat. She asked, "So you did it? You took them?" The mother tried to explain, but the trust had shifted. Years later, she still wonders if that single discovery changed the way her daughter believed in anything adults said. Not every parent feels regret. Another father describes the myth as a rite of passage, a harmless story that makes childhood sparkle. He calls it a useful trick. If I can get my son to brush his teeth, to not be afraid of the dentist, I will leave $1 under his pillow every time. He shrugs off the idea of betrayal. Kids need magic. They outgrow it and move on. But the line between magic and manipulation blurs when adults stage elaborate evidence, glitter trails on the windowsill, notes in tiny script, coins tucked so carefully that a child must believe. Some parents admit to feeling uneasy as they craft these scenes, watching their children's faces for the first flicker of doubt. There is relief when the question finally comes, is it real? But also a sting. For a few, the moment marks the first time their child looks at them and wonders what else might be a lie. The defense is always the same. It is just a story, a gentle way to nudge children through fear and pain. But the cost is trust, traded for compliance and comfort. Each coin under the pillow becomes a quiet lesson in how the world really works and who gets to decide what is true. A single baby tooth under a pillow is now worth more than ever. In the 1950s, a child might wake to find a nickel or a dime, just enough to buy a piece of candy. By the 1980s, the average payout crept toward $1, and the numbers kept climbing. According to Delta Dental's annual poll, the going rate today sits above $5 per tooth. Some parents report being pressured into leaving $10 or even $20 just to keep up with playground rumors or viral social media posts. The national average has more than doubled in the last 20 years, tracking alongside inflation and economic swings. Tooth Fairy apps now offer calculators to help parents decide the right amount, and kids compare notes at school, turning a lost tooth into a financial event. What began as spare change for a tiny milestone has ballooned into a miniature economy where the value of a child's body part is set by the whims of the market and the anxieties of adults. For many families, the transaction is no longer symbolic. It is a real negotiation with real stakes, and the price just keeps rising. Santa Claus visits once a year, judging a child's behavior and rewarding good deeds with presents. The Tooth Fairy, on the other hand, operates on a different schedule. She pays out every time a tooth falls, no matter how or why. Each lost tooth becomes a transaction, a small piece of the body converted into cash. Developmental psychologists point out how quickly children learn the rules. Lose a tooth, get paid. There is no need to be good, just to participate in the process. The lesson is simple. Your body can be exchanged for money, and the more it changes, the more you earn. This is often a child's first experience with performance-based rewards tied directly to their own biology. The exchange is automatic, impersonal, and routine. For some, it is thrilling, a secret economy that runs under their pillow. For others, it is unsettling, especially as the amounts rise and the expectation grows. The tradition quietly teaches that bodily milestones are worth something only when someone else decides to pay. It is a subtle but powerful lesson in autonomy, your body, your value, but the terms are set by someone else. The Tooth Fairy's visit is not just about comfort. It is a conditioning ritual, shaping how children come to understand their own worth. Every year, parents spend over $300 million rewarding lost teeth, a ritual that blurs the line between comfort and consent. In a world questioning bodily autonomy and truth, even bedtime stories shape future beliefs. The stories we choose to tell and the lies we are willing to defend still mold the adults our children become. Sometimes the real cost of magic is trust. Share your thoughts below and join the conversation.